At the start of the campaign, there was a lot of optimism, shall we say, about the SNP getting that overall majority. You didn't manage to do it. It certainly would have made the push for a second referendum a bit easier, wouldn't it? Are you disappointed you fell short?
Disappointed in a historic fourth win for the SNP? No. I think at the start of a campaign you have three goals in mind. One is to win the election, which we did in spectacular fashion, to increase the number of votes that you have, which we've done. More votes at this election than any other party's ever achieved in the devolved parliament, and also more seats. We won seats. The Tories lost seats, Labour lost seats. The SNP have done all these three things. And also, of course, there is an independence majority in the parliament. So an astonishingly good result for the SNP, and I believe for Scottish democracy.
You're talking there about the pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament. We've been talking about it a lot on the show as well. A majority of MSPs support independence, if you look at the SNP and the Scottish Greens. But if you look at vote shares, the pro-independence parties won less than 50%, yourself and the Scottish Greens, and the anti-referendum parties won more than 50%. So on that basis, you know, one person, one vote, then actually would it be democratic to push for another referendum?
This is just an absolutely bizarre argument. David Cameron got around 36% of the vote when he took forward a Brexit referendum, of course against the wishes of people in Scotland. If the election that we had yesterday had been held at Westminster on constituencies, we'd have a majority of about 400. So the idea that in a parliamentary party election you don't have a mandate when the main party and other parties have more than 50% of the seats, it really comes down to a vote in the Parliament. And I didn't hear anybody saying, during all the endless Brexit votes that we had when different parties voted for the same thing on many occasions, that invalidated the result. This is democracy. The SNP have done extremely well. We will have a majority for an independence referendum in the Parliament. But for the first 100 days, as has been made clear by the First Minister, we'll be concentrating on the recovery, the health service, education and the health of the people in Scotland.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're talking about focusing on the recovery. At what point do you start to push for another independence referendum? The reason I'm asking this question is it feels to me a little bit like the timeline is slipping, that it's in nobody's interest to do it right now, including your own. Is that fair? When do you want to see another referendum?
I think most people in the independence movement would want to see it as soon as possible, but they also realise that we're in the grip of a pandemic, and that is still a very real threat. We've seen a slight uptick in some areas in Scotland in recent days in terms of the incidence of coronavirus, and that's got to be the priority for everybody. I think all the parties have agreed on that. I think it's also true to say, though, that the election that we've just had was not a normal election, even though we had a fantastic increase in turnout. There wasn't the usual hustings, the public debates, the town hall meetings, and I think we'd all want to see, when there is to be the independence referendum, a much more full-blooded, engaged campaign on that issue. So we'll know when the public health situation is right, and the Scottish Parliament will take the decision as to exactly when that happens and when the referendum should be.
Can you not give us any guidance at all on when you think it would be the right time to, push for another referendum?
Well, I don't think you've seen anything different from Boris Johnson, Mark Drakeford or Nicola Sturgeon, who do not predict when the end of the pandemic is, because we know how unpredictable this disease is, and also because of the new variants as well. So it's a hostage to fortune to start putting a time limit on that, but we will know when it's over. We will know when it's safe to have that full-blooded campaign that I've mentioned. But until that happens, our concentration has to be focused on the pandemic, making sure that we drive down coronavirus and look after the public health of the people in Scotland.
Can you guarantee a referendum by the end of 2024, as you previously said?
Well, the only caveat to that, of course, would be the pandemic. But yes, that's our intention, is to have that referendum, I've said, as soon as possible. And we are making fantastic progress with the pandemic and the fight against coronavirus, as you can see in the figures now. But that threat is still there. And of course, there is also the threat of new variants of the virus. So nobody can put time limits on that. No politician is doing that just now. And it's unreasonable, I think, to ask them to do that. But at the earliest possible opportunity, when it's safe to do so, we will move to have the referendum, the one that Scotland has just voted for in massive numbers.
If Boris Johnson refuses to grant another referendum, or if the Supreme Court finds it would be illegal because it doesn't fall under the powers of the Scottish Parliament to move the legislation, What would you then do? Would you just hold an independence referendum anyway?
Well, first of all, I've never believed that Boris Johnson would continue to, as he would see it, veto Scottish democracy after the result of an election like the one we had yesterday. I've never believed that would be the case. And I think you're seeing already some changing language from the UK government, which was inevitable. It's also true to say that Boris Johnson is a man that's not a stranger to U-turns. If you think about just his manifesto at the recent election, he said he wouldn't reduce the size of the armed forces and then promptly did. He signed an international treaty which he then renounced pretty much as soon as he'd signed it. So Boris Johnson will change to take account of the political circumstances in Scotland. And we will proceed with the referendum. The referendum will happen. It's going to happen. I think the Conservatives, many of whom I've spoken to, understand that's the case. The only issue is when the time is right, and the time will be right when it's safe to have that referendum.
I understand that, you don't believe Boris Johnson, but I'm not asking you what you think Boris Johnson will do. I'm asking what you will do. If either the Supreme Court says the referendum would be, effective and illegal one, or if Boris Johnson refuses to grant it, would you hold a referendum anyway in those circumstances?
Well, you're asking me to jump past what I don't believe, and I don't believe that Boris Johnson will, as you say, veto this. So I don't think that's going to happen. So you're now into a hypothetical situation. And of course, it wouldn't be the Scottish Government that would be taking legal action. The Scottish Government will proceed if the Scottish Parliament votes for the referendum. We would like to do that on the basis of a Section 30 agreement. That makes sure it's all agreed as it was back in 2014 or previously 2012 with David Cameron. We'd like to do it on that basis. That's the right way to do it. And I believe that will happen. I think that's what's going to happen. But in the event that there's any denial of Scottish democracy, in the event that Boris Johnson tries to do a Trump and try and use the legal process to subvert Scottish democracy, I believe the referendum will still happen.